Your life.
Welcome to Slow News Day Live. My name is Steve Poikinen. I am here in half burnout Boulder Creek, California. I am joined by my incredible co-host, Glory Jones. And we are very, very pleased today to bring back to the show one of the more salient voices in anti-war veteran, like in that sphere. We've got with us retired Army Major General Danny Sjursen. Danny, welcome back to the show. It is very good to see you, sir.
Well, thanks for having me. You added general to the major, which I think.
Oh, did I? Shit, I'm sorry.
No. I think intellectually I deserve that, but
okay.
Competence-wise, no. But
it was
always happy.
What it was is I earlier this morning I was playing the Periodic Table of Elements song by Tom Lehrer, which is a ripoff of the Pirates of Penzance. I am the very model of a modern Major General song, and I think that's how it got. Now everyone knows how my mind works, and they're rushing away from the show. They're fleeing in droves.
No, stay, guys.
It's funny you should mention that. I've been called both indulgent and tangential, which is accurate. But one of my instructors at West Point was a guy named Joel Rayburn, and at the time he was a major, and he's a super smart guy, interesting, and he taught British history, and so he played some of that music, and we did the whole modern Major General thing, and we talked about the historical things that this was kind of based on. Turns out I ended up working for some of those modern Major Generals in real life, but he then of course is reborn as sort of, this professor of mine is reborn as a neocon and becomes the special envoy to Syria for Trump. And so it's just a horrible letdown, when a teacher you love goes off and becomes monstrous. So of course the only thing that I would do about that is write a 4,000 word takedown of him in a 360 sense, which I may or may not have done a few months ago. But yeah, it's just interesting that you bring that up.
Danny, you've got a hell of a book out right now. It's called Patriotic, Dissent, and what you're trying to do a number of things in this book. There's a lot going on in it, and your writing style, I found, was incredibly similar to the way that I write in general, and the way that I used to write when I was doing it as a supplementary income / maybe when I grow up they'll let me join the club, and then I got fired from the Nation and then blacklisted, so that didn't happen. But I enjoy it, and it's fun for me to read, because when you have an appreciation and a knowledge and a study of language, then you can manipulate it and play with it, and it becomes this both an art form and a set of tools, and it's incredibly fun. At least for me. And I know you said that telling you that the book is good is more important than telling you that you're handsome, but yeah, both cases, accurate.
Yeah. I need that. I need all kinds of reinforcement. Yes. No, it's funny though. When I read my own stuff from different times, over the years, I see that I've kind of changed in the way that I write. I've always had a certain style, but I have definitely gotten more honest, in terms of my voice is me. And so people who know me, and especially people who know me all the time, they say, I can't read your stuff without hearing your voice. And there are definitely editors out there who don't love that, right, about me. And they just think I'm horrible to edit, and oh, you need to tone everything down and avoid the connections, less dashes. And I'm that's just not going to work for me, because that's how I think. But I think that it's a niche market. Not everybody appreciates it, but I do try to be real in my writing the same way I am in my speaking. That shouldn't be so rare. And there are other folks doing it, but if you read the stuff that's in most mainstream sources, even if it's an opinion piece or an analytical piece, you could just tell there's nothing authentic about it,
Yeah.
And they attempt this objectivity thing, which has always been a lie. It's always been a myth anyway. So just get your facts right. Don't like make up stories, but be honest. I don't know. It just seems like an obvious thing, but it's out of fashion. Again.
It really is, and not only is it out of fashion, it's almost foreboding. You're supposed to put up this front, especially when you're describing America's war machine or the American Empire and all of the things that are related to it. You're supposed to put up a civility screen, right? where even if you're trying to relay a horrifying reality, you have to do it in the most staid, sanitized, soulless way possible. And for you who lived it, I would imagine that is not just an improbability, but an impossibility.
I've gotten to the point where I think that civility, when talking about war, is obscene, right? I said that civility is obscene. And so, because what you get if you follow that thread, I read just enough philosophy to be dangerous. And, there's this concept that if you really want to understand any argument, you have to take it to its logical conclusion, right? So if you take what you're describing, this like civility and this staid language about war that you'll see in the New York Times and all these other outlets, take that out to its logical conclusion, and you get a walking kind of obscenity in a person like Jake Sullivan, right? Who I've just kind of torn down recently, and these other people in the Biden team who are the perfect example of that. Like they are walking caveats and hedges. That's if a caveat could take human form, that's who they are. It's always like, well, the war in Yemen is bad, or it didn't work out so well. But, when Obama got in, he was doing it because he thought he could make it better by being on the inside. It's just that kind of language is dangerous. Language is dangerous, right? So Hitchin, who I used to love and then was dead to me, right, because of Iraq and everything. And I've kind of started to come back to for a number of reasons without forgiving that. He used to always say, like, look to the language if you want to understand what's being done, right? And people will out themselves. And in that, language was kind of my first love. It may turn out to be the love of my life, which is both sad and beautiful at the same time, and a reflective of how life's going for me. But I do think that it is so instructive. You can find out so much by the way someone describes these things. And it just seems so strange to me that we've decided that our wars, starvation and death and bombings and all these things, that somehow they have to be couched in politeness.
Oh my God, yes.
It doesn't feel very polite with those bombs. I don't know.
Civility really is like a tool of the empire as a whole, because it's just gatekeeping in its purest form, from the sense of, oh yeah, like from the perspective of maybe like a brown person in one of these countries, like, yeah, I know your people are getting tortured for no reason. They're getting starved via sanctions. They're getting bombed every day. But let's be polite about it. I don't want you to curse to me about it. It's like, I'll get visibly angry talking about how Black and brown people are essentially viewed as objects and as subjects of imperial and colonial rule. But like, it should make you angry. That's the natural human reaction. And to try to suppress that only benefits the people at the top perpetuating the violence. So, yeah.
I wrote down when you wrote civility as a tool of the empire. I wrote that down because I love language, and that's a really great phrase. And if I ever use it, I promise to footnote you, because I'm a trained historian, But no, I think what you're mentioning is super important. And I've seen a lot of like the grotesque defense of some of the Biden squad coming in. I really went to war with this one woman over Twitter a little bit about, you can't criticize women and women of color that he's bringing in, because there's so many white males in the national security establishment and all this. And I think to myself, well, a lot of the children that have like starved under our sanctions are women and women of color, little girls of color. I just don't understand how that works. Like, of course we should criticize the lack of diversity in the national security establishment. White men have had their go at empire, and it really hasn't gone great. You know what I mean? I don't even order mayonnaise at restaurants because, like I tell waitresses, I don't like white condiments or white people. So I'm not being that guy, right? Well, that'll get a rise out of an 18-year-old every time. And it never gets old. But I mean, my point is, when I criticize that argument, you have to be careful. You say to yourself, okay, well, this could just sound like one of these, white cis males saying, oh, like you're bringing out identity politics. But I think it's more than that, because the reasons of empire tend to be people of color and subjects of Orientalism and, neo-imperialism or old school imperialism. And then we don't talk about them. We're so worried about what are Michelle Flournoy's feelings going to be like if we criticize her? And that, like, I just don't have any time for that. I just don't.
You kind of touch on this a little bit early on in the book. I'm going to pull up I like
that.
A quote from it here. This, what I've described as generally is what generally counts for patriotism these days. Thank the troops, love America, or at least its gilded symbols, pay your historically modest, despite conservative hype, taxes. And here's the key: keep your mouth shut. Nothing is being asked of you, materially or physically, so just politely champion the soldiers, wave a flag, and support the foreign policies of what's obviously, compared to those evil terrorists over there, a reasonably well-intentioned government. Only there's a catch. Step outside of those lines, take a rare interest in the nation's wars, and then, well, mister, get ready to reap the whirlwind. Expect pejorative labels like hippie, tree hugger, un-American traitor, or the latest favorite, Russian asset. That is 100% accurate. It is, and it directly relates to this civility policing, this diversity for the sake of optics, but never diversity for the sake of opinion. I've been calling it intersectional fascism about the last year and a half now. Works better on Twitter if you use like different colors of clapping hands while you explain that you want more intersectional fascism, please.
Yeah,
It's horrifying. Just flat out the way that you can abuse a populace through sanitized language, the way that you can manipulate a populace through sanitized language, it is not new. It's not surprising. What is surprising about it is the number of people who still fall for it, Danny.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. I am angry, and I'm lucky, because there is a thing with this. Like, I am lucky that I'm a white male because I'm allowed to be angry, and that doesn't make me like all the different words that get thrown like shrill and stuff out there. But even looking like I do and being angry, that comes out like, oh no, calm down, like, you're hysterical in this kind of language that's normally thrown at other people. And I'm saying, well, no, you're not angry enough that's what I'm always telling readers, right? Whether they know it or not, like, you're not angry enough because you're not paying attention, right? And you don't realize that this is also coming home to you. Not that should be the motivation, right? There's enough reason to be against indecency. What is interesting though is how many people accept it. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of them, I think, is that we're not allowed to talk about class in America, for example. And so when you eliminate all of that, then, you can't talk about kind of cross-class alliances. The other thing is that when one of the two sides, right, in the duopoly is so coarse and just overt and buffoonish in so many ways, then it creates like the fear monger that anything else is better. And so what's going to happen eventually is that if I have to listen to one more like vaguely wannabe progressive upper middle class white female tell me that at least George W. Bush was a good father and loves his country, then like everyone's gonna have to see on the Kansas City Plaza an intellectual murder suicide. Like, I don't know what that looks like in practice, but it's like this close to happening, because that's what we've done, right? We've said that, well, at least this guy is a polite emperor, like Obama, or woke warmonger, as Max Blumenthal said on Moderate Rebels when I was on the show. Like, and I like that, and I wrote that one down because that's kind of happening. The clip or the excerpt that you showed kind of gets at something I've been arguing from the start, which is, we've taken the American people out of war. And that's not just like saying that we should go back to the draft, because I'm of very much two minds about that. It's more saying whether it's money, whether it's actual media coverage or showing the imagery, we've just taken all responsibility, all accountability. There's no longer even a responsibility to pay attention if it happens across the oceans. And so when you do that, can you really be a republic anymore? I mean, can you even be what you claim to be if you've just removed the citizenry? The founding fathers didn't agree about anything. And so when people say we have to go back to the intent of the founders, I'm like, which ones? Like, people say that and don't know anything. See, the thing is, my favorite thing about like people, especially even like elites and experts in quotes in the establishment media, is they know things, but they say all kinds of things, right? So they don't know any things about a subject, but they'll make like large proclamations. So you'll get things like, let's get back to the intent of the founders. And of course, the left or the establishment left thinks they know what the founders meant. And the right is sure that they know. And they don't realize that they didn't agree on anything. But one of the only things they did mostly all agree on was that, republics become empires. It's the curse of Rome. That's what they were afraid of. And, a big component of that is that when the citizenry no longer pays attention to the imperial wars, the systems collapse, right? The institutions collapse. Whatever they were, flawed as they were in the first place, what's left of them is gone.
I mean, yes. So I want to take a moment here to talk about synergy and unplanned happy coincidences, because on Friday I spent a little bit of time putting together just a couple of slides or a couple of screenshots from your book. I did highlight a couple of things that stood out to me, but so far in the course of natural conversation, we've entered into not just the first one but the second one that I made 2 days ago, and it's this one. Let me pull it up here real quick.
I'm super happy with these. No one else has done this.
So here we are. For the war machine, driven as it is by a profit-motivated military-industrial complex fronted by arms-dealing defense contractors, requires collective public apathy. And this is largely what we're talking about here. It is this mandated, I almost or definitely preferred public apathy that allows for a military industrial complex with a whole bunch of other acronyms tacked onto it, courtesy of Ray McGovern and the Mickey Mat, which I don't know if you've heard Ray discourse on the Mickey Mat before or not.
I mean, I've heard him a million times, but that doesn't jump out. But that's just because I'm out of bandwidth in my brain. So I may.
I will at some point in the show pull up my cheat sheet with what that means. I can never remember it off the top of my head.
I remember it. It's military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank.
That's it. Thank you. Full points for the only one of us that's currently in college. But it's taking away the draft, and you speak to this in your book. It has created an environment of apathy and performative support for the war machine that requires absolutely no thought, absolutely no consideration, and absolutely no exploration of exactly what it is we're doing in these countries.
Yeah, and it's just one of those tough things, because the nuclear option, when I get really frustrated, is bring back the draft, like no deferments, and that'll solve it. And I'm not actually completely convinced that either that would fully solve it or that that's the right move in terms of like liberty. However, it's hard not to have that guilty pleasure feeling. What we do know is that there were real costs to getting rid of the draft. And of course, I've talked about this a million times, and I won't go into all the details, but I read the documents that have been declassified from the Nixon era. I know what the people planning this, including Nixon, said about it. And the whole thing was a cynical ruse. Nixon has never done a nice thing in his life because it was a nice thing. It's just, he can't do it. I almost respect him for being so honest about that. right? Like, I kind of like that. I love monsters in the open rather than in my closet, because I am still a little scared of the dark. And so, but like he said, like, we're gonna break the anti-war movement, right? And this is one of the ways we're gonna do it. And you know, and they love, the people who were in charge at the time loved it, and it worked. And we really still haven't grappled with that yet. And now we're living in that logical conclusion I was talking about with philosophy. We've taken that to its logical end, so that you can have a war that's in its 20th year in Afghanistan, which by every single metric has been failing, right? I mean, it's we can't win. We've already lost. It's a zombie war. Just nobody told the people who haven't died yet that it's over, right? Which is a real absurdity meets tragedy. But you can have that, and still the citizenry either pays no attention to it, or the ones that do pay attention because they make a living sort of in the media space, or they feel good about the fact they read the New Yorker enough to talk about it at a party, they actually find themselves supporting more war if the person trying to like end it for whatever reason, or even talking about ending it, or the person shepherding the war is, you know, it depends on what side they're on. You know what I mean? If it's the blue team that wants to end the war, then it's like, well, yeah, this war's got to end. And if the red team wants to end it, they're like, no, the war must go on. I mean, there's no principles to any of it. And it does recall Orwell, who I was manically tweeting yesterday morning, when he was talking about the Spanish Civil War, and he was saying, you know, it was in Spain was the first time that he saw whether something was an atrocity defined by sort of like partisan talking points. In other words, if the Republican side did it, it was an atrocity. If the national side did it, it wasn't. And then even within the Republican side, right, if it was like the POUM anarchist militia doing it, or the more Stalinist party, in other words, like, people were still dead. In other words, like, if the Obama administration does a drone strike on a school bus in Northwest Yemen, or if the Trump administration does, like, those kids don't care. Right? Like, as one of them bleeds to death, like after like on his way to a school trip, like, he didn't really particularly care if it was like a blue team drone strike. And I just think that we've gotten to the point where war is either ignored mostly, except by the insufferable, as you know, the three of us, right? The insufferables, that would be our superhero movie. I don't know what my costume would look like, because I did wear like a man-sized
I saw that.
Yeah, costume
before I deleted my Facebook, and I haven't been happier since.
Wow. And I took a picture with my ex too, which is called effective co-parenting gone to its logical extreme. But you know, I don't know. We would be the insufferables. I don't know what our costume would be, but except for us, which is, there's lots of us, but it's a small subset. It's either ignored, or it's championed or accepted or apologized for, depending on who's in charge.
It's almost infantilized. You know what I mean?
A great word for it.
Like, they pat you on the head. No, look at you, you little anti-war activist. I bet you've got lots of thoughts, don't you? Why don't you just go back over there with your buddies and talk to them about it, because we're trying to kill some brown people over here. Scurry on. You know, it's fucking
story of my life in political spheres. Oh, you're just too young. You're not experienced in life enough. I'm like, what you mean, dog? People are dying.
I like, that's the urgency. The urgency, Lori. Like, the infantilizing is real. It's like, there's this sense, and I used to think it when I was a kid, or even as like a teenager and someone who just joined the army. My thought was, stuff seems kind of messed up. Like, I was cerebral enough and bookish enough to know that, right? I couldn't miss it. Even if I tried to miss it. I tried to not see the bad, because I wanted to love America so much so that I could show how tough I was. But when I did realize there were problems, I would say, yeah, but they know something we don't. Like, this whole idea that there are adults minding the store, we have to trust them, the experts. Yeah. And then you get to be at least at the mid-range part of it, like I was. And then you read enough about how this really works, and it becomes part of your life. And you realize, oh, there's not only no adults minding the store, but the people deciding whether to bomb Libya or not are like a mixed gender version of the Mean Girls, like sitting, you know what I mean? It's like Jake Sullivan and like, you know, Hillary and it's ridiculous. You realize it's like a high school cafeteria deciding whether to do a regime change. And it really does shake you. And so it's like, no, they don't know better than us. They don't do better than, like, the outcomes are awful. The three of us could sit on the National Security Council, and I'm not saying we'd always do a perfect job, but I'm convinced we do as well as Susan Rice and company, right? Like, or the warmongers Rice is how I would title my my sort of Aesop's fable about them, Condi and Susan. But I mean, nevertheless, like, there aren't any adults minding the store. They're the experts that are infantilizing us by saying, okay, you just don't know enough. Like, you have to trust the experts. They don't know what the heck they're talking about. And they don't see it. They don't go see it. And if they do make a visit to a war zone, it's a Potemkin patrol, as I've called it. It's all staged for them to make sure it's completely safe, and they see what the generals want them to see, right? So everyone's happy, and everyone writes a good report, and everyone gets promoted and goes to the same cocktail parties. And all of that is the real obscenity.
I couldn't agree more. And the role that our free press plays in not just pitching and selling these atrocities, but giving us this incredibly false perspective that the grown-ups are minding the store, that, well, they wouldn't be experts unless they didn't know what they were talking about. This sort of misplaced confidence that turns into hubris, that turns into a snarling defense of these creatures. It is fucking killing us, man. And for the person who keeps leaving comments about my potty mouth on the show, I just made it 31 minutes into the show before my first F word. So suck it.
Fuck you.
Wait, is that a thing?
That's a thing, dude. I routinely get comments where I really like what you guys are trying to say, but if you could do it without such coarse language, and it's like, we're talking about mangled bodies and the demons who produce them. It goes back to the civility thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep having that conversation.
Here, wait, Steve, wait. I have something for them.
Oh, and I have one of those too. It's right here. Yeah.
When I'm talking about bombing babies, I like to make sure that no profanity is used in the process. That just seems right. You know what I mean?
Ah, my God. But real quick, before I get to the next thing that I wanted to show from the book, I do want to show the Mickey mascot.
Oh, yes.
This is an image created by an artist named Ron English. There he is. That's the Mickey mascot. Upon request, I sent that over to Ray McGovern. He got a big kick out of it. But let's see, where did it go? I had it queued. Oh, I had it queued, and then I went to the mascot. That's right. The war on free press, free speech, and dissent more generally is the true legacy of the American war in Europe of 1917 and 18. This in and of itself was such a fascinating part of the book, because so few people are curious about things like the fact that the U.S. had a Sedition Act, the fact that the Espionage Act was only around as a political weapon, and now that it's being used to silence WikiLeaks and to end the life of Julian Assange, I genuinely feel like a concerted, targeted effort of education, outreach, and mobilization to either get rid of or amend entirely the Espionage Act is going to be a vital component of activism going into 2021, a lowercase b Biden, capital letters, Harris administration. It's funny that you keep mentioning Jake Sullivan. We had Vanessa Beeley on the Free Assange Vigil yesterday, and boy, did she tear him a new asshole. Like, it was great, dude. It was great. And that guy, he looks like he looks like he should be inheriting his grandfather's mortuary.
Yeah, like he was built in a DNC laboratory, but like something went wrong a little.
Yeah, and the part where they were supposed to put in the little shot of like convincing humanity, it got spilled on the floor, and they were like, "Fuck it, we're late anyway. Let's just get it out of here."
Yeah, they ran out of empathy. They were like, "Just give him a double dose of ambition. Just give him a double dose of ambition. Shameless, the shameless sort. That's the best kind."
Yeah, he was Pete Buttigieg gone wrong.
Right. The fucking the shot of charm that they gave little CIA Pete. That was all that they had, decided to make up. Right. All that they had on hand, and they were like, "Shit, we gave too much to Buttigieg, but we need Sullivan out there selling this shit. Let's just hope he so intimidates people by looking like a walking corpse that he doesn't need any charm." And between him and Avril Haines, like,
yeah, it's another dead set of shark eyes right there. Just
the Biden-Harris administration has managed to cultivate the worst neocons and the worst neoliberals and sort of put them together in this collection of dead-eyed servants to power that I don't think we've seen since the PNAC boys were running the country.
I love me some like symbolism and analogies, but who knew that the front row of John McCain's funeral was going to become the Biden? Do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't get that memo. I should have seen it coming down the road, but I mean, if I could just quickly say something about the part you showed about like the espionage act in the book, because I don't know, man, like I make these connections and I think they're brilliant, and then I wonder I'm crazy, like I kind of gaslight myself, but like, if that's a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. Think about it, it's a thing.
So think about this for a second. We get involved in a world war that we should have never been involved in. But like nobody talks about that except like some serious historians. Like everyone's like, "Oh yeah, back-to-back World War champs. We had to fight the Nazis twice." And it's like, no, they weren't Nazis the first time. Like it didn't really need to happen. Like it was a big mess. It was like a historic crime that we got involved, and it blew back in terms of the Sedition and Espionage Act. But like, let's think about this. Like, if there is tragic comedy in truth as well as in fiction, you have the first Southerner, right, to become president since the Civil War, who is a liberal internationalist, but also brings segregation back to Washington, and who's Woodrow Wilson, whose favorite movie that he screens privately in the White House is Birth of a Nation, right? Which, like, who doesn't like the Klan as protagonists? You know what I mean? That's classic, classically obscene. So so you got this guy, and it's his administration that puts in place the Espionage Act, which almost exactly 100 years later is used more times by a president than all the ones before him. And which president is it? The first Black president, right? Who is also a liberal internationalist. You can't write it. Like, the gods are laughing, folks. Okay. And yes, plural, gods. If there are any gods, they're the Greek ones, and they fight like mean girls. That's my religion. Okay. Like, but seriously, you can't write that. But I do think that now you see what's happening with Julian Assange, and you see how Obama used it, and you say, wow. If you don't believe at this point that this is a systemic problem rather than a red-blue problem or discrete wars, man, I don't know. That, to me, the historian's eye is valuable there, with a little satire, which most historians, they're boring, so they can't do that. But
yeah, I'm kind of that way too, where I gaslight myself into thinking I'm crazy, and then I'm just like, you know what, I'm gonna just fucking roll with it. But natural part of anxiety. But as I digress, the connections you make between, like, these mechanisms of the empire being used back then and being used, today, essentially coming back onto us, like onto US citizens, like that's just something that I've that I've noticed a lot, particularly in these last couple months on the ground with all the protests going on. And, you know, in the epilogue of your book, you point out how your first event was this Black Lives Matter protest. And like, you kind of made that connection again with how, you know, US cops receiving trainings in Israel and how a lot of the cops act essentially as our military. So I just kind of want to like pick your brain a bit about like how that felt from kind of like a veteran's perspective, as seeing how those mechanisms of empire come back home and are weaponized against US citizens.
I'm really glad you asked that. I mean, I was really hoping, and I still am holding out some hope because I have to sleep at night, that the widespread and inspiring tens of millions in the streets after George Floyd, which in and of itself has value, right? But I'm hoping that the cosmetic of the militarization of the police, which is far more than cosmetic, but that the sight of it, in other words, would connect empire at home and abroad for more folks, which is hard to do, right, when you're living paycheck to paycheck. So I'm not like and then I'm not just attacking the citizenry, in other words, but for me, it was, I mean, it was kind of obscene. And those protests aren't about me. I'm just there. I'm just a body, right? Because sometimes that's all you have. And you just got to live your values however you can, however small way. But it was hard for me, though, to be in Kansas City and to be like tear gassed by my own government that first weekend by guys wearing better military gear than I had, with better overwatch than I had on most patrols, meaning that they had 3 to 4 drones above us and a sniper team on top of a very upscale clothing store on the Kansas City Plaza, right? Which is where our protests were. And of course, why were they there? Because their biggest fear is there might be some looting of an upscale store, right? Which there was almost none, right? Statistically irrelevant number, but of course they lied about that in the media. That to me was jarring on a personal level, because I did, when there was like, when for a moment, a couple of times, it looked like the Neil Young song Ohio had come to life. I mean, there really was just gas everywhere. There were strangers picking up each other's children who they didn't know in the middle of a pandemic, right? And running because they were gassing peaceful protests in the park. I just thought, like, man, you know, for a long time I had written fun little like alliteration sentences like Baghdad is Baltimore and, you know, Kansas City is Kandahar. I'd been writing that for years about these programs, like the sharing of equipment and stuff, and the proliferation of veterans into these police forces, and then the culture of militarism in terms of using counterinsurgency tactics in the drug war, right? Because they've always been related. But it came to light in a real way in June, and you know, in June and July in particular, when this was really actually happening. I mean, it did feel like some of the urban protests and to some extent urban warfare in particularly Baghdad. And I just thought, God, is this really my country? Like, so it's come to this, you know. I mean, going back to that song, because I love like culture and pop culture and all that stuff. Like, you know, there's the part in the song where he says, you know, tin soldiers and Nixon's coming. But the line that hit me was, we're finally on our own. And that's what it felt like then. And again, I was just a tiny part of it, but I really do hope that people don't forget that. And I know that the protests haven't stopped, and there's going to be more waves. And I hope that there is, and I hope that when there's a connection between, look, what we do overseas is directly and inextricably linked to what happens on our streets. My first, I'm sorry, I'm going on, but my first real involvement in street protests, I was in my 30s, embarrassingly, right? I was teaching at West Point, and in Staten Island, just about 2 miles from where I'd grown up, you know, Eric Garner was killed, urban lynched, right, by the police on a street corner. And so I would, you know, drive down from West Point at night, secretly. You know, I didn't tell my bosses, obviously. You know, Wu-Tang hoodie took over for my like dress blue uniform that I would teach in. And, you know, I'd go to these protests. First time I was ever involved. And it was hard. I mean, in a small way. I mean, just I wasn't really sleeping and stuff, but it was jarring. I felt like, oh my God, okay, my double life that I've been leading intellectually for a while has finally hit the wall, and this is unsustainable. And that was just one small person's, you know, view of it. I just wish that I wish that more veterans would agree with me, and I wish that more of the ones who did agree would actually do something about it, even if it was a small way like mine.
I agree with that 100%. I know that when I talk to veterans, at least here in Santa Cruz County, in California, where it's so NPR liberal sanitized that mild criticism of the war machine gets you treated with disdain. Like the vets that I know and that I talk to know in their souls that this empire isn't sustainable, that what is happening and has happened isn't for the greater good, but to a person they'll tell me, I can't talk to anybody about this. I can barely talk to my battle buddy about this. Like it's just one more element of stress and or depression, and there's got to be a mechanism or a series of mechanisms put in place that open up the conversation, make anti-war veterans part of, I guess, allowable dialogue, as fucked up as that sounds, but aside from the places that we've already created that again are infantilized and mocked and even to a degree coddled as long as they don't get big enough. It's frustrating as hell because I'd never, I personally, I didn't serve. When the recruiter showed up to my house, I intentionally looked as grubby as possible. And they were like, I'd be like, no, I have severe problems with authority. I'm always going to have those. They're like, well, you're going to have to take orders for the rest of your life. And I said, I'm pretty sure none of my bosses are going to tell me to kill somebody just because. And that's when they took off. And I had that speech worked out in my head at 17 because I scored some ridiculously high number on the ASVABs, and everybody wanted me to go immediately into officer school and shit like that. And I'm like, no, I'm not into it. I already know how to shoot. That's enough. I plan on living in the middle of nowhere eventually. It's a handy skill to have around, on the off chance that we haven't killed every single bear or mountain lion. But that's the extent of what I want my knowledge with firearms to be is, what kind will most easily stop a charging animal. And that's it, man. That's it. That's all, it's all I wanted out of it. I was going somewhere with this. I was.
Can I say one thing about it? I feel like being more provocative than usual. What better space? I've never really laid this out, but and I'm not really actually conspiracy theorizing, although I think that's often overused to silence people. But okay, so talking about anti-war veterans, why are there so few? Why do most of my friends, even West Point, upper middle class, establishment kids, why do most of them agree with me but do nothing about it, right? Don't even dream of speaking out. Well, I think there's a lot of reasons, but there's some of the ways they get you into the apathy sphere is this. So there's basically three paths for how to handle a veteran. So the first one is, you find a real sociopath believer. Okay, so there are plenty of people who are attracted to military, just like corporate boardrooms and stuff, who have those tendencies of narcissism, sociopath, or somewhere on that spectrum, right? There's them. They're easy. They're never going to speak out, obviously, because they love it. Then you've got the people who they just co-opt, and they co-opt you two ways. They create an identity for you, you are a soldier. Because I had that feeling. If I'm not a soldier, what am I? Right. And that's so silly because I'm a human, I'm a son, and right, I'm a million things, but you start to believe it when you do it long enough, and they tell you that, they build that in. Only socialize with other soldiers. No one else understands you or can trust you. Wall yourself off, become a Praetorian Guard. They foster that. And then also with money, right? So especially for officers or even in enlisted guys, the healthcare is great. You'll always have a house. I mean, it's better than what's on offer oftentimes on the outside, depending on your level of education. Yeah. And it's easy. It just happens for you. Your paycheck just shows up, right? And then the third thing is, after they break you, which is a whole bunch of other people, okay, we'll just load you up on SSRIs and medications that are going to numb you. And I don't blame folks. I've done that. I've been there. I've had some real near breakdowns. Okay. And I've tried meds and all that stuff, and I'm not doing it now, and it shows, and it's good for me. So I'm not judging, but I do know this. I'm in touch with my soldiers who served under me, mostly enlisted guys who are out now. Most of them are not doing particularly well. And they don't even have the headspace, emotional health wise, for writing or speaking or going to a rally in many cases. And I'm not making excuses for them, but some of them are straight up in survival mode from the minute they wake up until the minute they go to bed, trying not to kill themselves, really. And then they're all medicated up, and it's like, wow, I just laid out 3 paths to make sure we don't have a larger anti-war veteran base. And it works. And I don't know if it's all planned out, but that's the system that as it's developed, and it works. They count on it.
Yeah, I'll say this. If Nixon had the foresight or the deviousness, or his crew did, to understand that taking away the draft would forever cripple the anti-war movement, then U.S. Army shrinks, and U.S. Army intel personnel have absolutely mapped out a way to make sure that you never see another, well, you discussed it in your book, the bonus army.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, we're 100 years removed from that, and the closest that we got to it was the 2010 reemergence of the Winter Soldier thing, where what's his name, Preisner and Adam Kokesh, friend of the show, and a number of other veterans took to the streets to discuss what was going on in the war in Iraq, in the war in Afghanistan, in very plain terms, and what it meant to them as soldiers, and the shit that those guys took for having the courage, the strength of character, the consciousness to take that stand. To this day remains incredibly admirable to me in my mind. But we have to, I guess, as content creators and people who are involved in this whole weird independent media sphere, we have to make sure that our platforms have been a place where these conversations not only get to happen, but that results get cultivated out of them, and that we don't just, feel good about ourselves for an hour or an hour and a half and then go back to our impending doom.
Absolutely. Those guys are incredibly inspiring. I think partly because they kind of knew. I think they kind of had a fatalistic sense. I don't want to speak for them, but I know enough of them who've been involved in those early days where they knew they weren't going to make the kind of splash that Kerry did. Mm-hmm. They knew that in the time of the all-volunteer force and the forever wars that they were going to be mostly marginalized. And so doing it anyway is actually a special kind of courage in a way, right? I mean, it takes a certain commitment. It's the thing about getting rid of the draft as well is that it ensured that there would be a built-in argument for the people who wanted to attack them and dismiss them, which is this: you volunteered, didn't you?
Yeah.
Period. Like ... Like, in other words, what are you complaining about? Like, you volunteered, no one made you do it, right? And I get it. I understand that argument was laid out for people, but of course it's kind of intellectually paltry. It misunderstands all the factors that drive someone in the military. And it also misunderstands the fact people can make a change, right? You're allowed to change your mind. Like, your 17-year-old self shouldn't be allowed to do anything profound, right? Like, make any long-term decisions. And so this idea that you're going to forever be prisoner to that is ludicrous, but it's there. And the getting rid of the draft partly did that as well. So, and then you have the obscenity of those guys went to see John Kerry, some of the early Iraq Veterans Against the War, which founded in 2004. So it's founded largely around the 2004 pivotal election, or what was seen as a pivotal election. So it's Kerry Bush. Of course, Kerry makes a name for himself at Winter Soldier in like, 70 something, right? Early 70s. And they try to go see him, the IVAW guys, many of whom I know who were there, right? And they said that we're going to meet with Kerry, and he's got to meet with us. He was the original, or the most prominent, famous Vietnam veteran against the war. We purposely named our organization in line with them to pull on their legacy. He could end this war. He'll definitely meet with us, and he wouldn't. He wouldn't meet with them. He wouldn't associate himself with them because you know why? He was worried that the Republicans would swift vote him. But here's the thing, John. They're going to swift vote you anyway. And they did. They're monsters. Don't play to these people. Don't hedge. Don't fall the Democrats' dilemma of being like, well, I got to be a little tough so that they don't say I'm weak. They're going to say you're weak anyway. Do you know what I'm saying? And if not, they'll make something else up about you. They'll be like, oh, he's gay. It doesn't matter. They will find something to attack you for, so just be yourself. But, of course, Kerry didn't really have principles anyway. But yeah, it was constructive.
Kerry, God, dude. And you say it in your book. You're like, he peaked in 71. And I fucking,
right?
you couldn't be more right. The book is called Patriotic Dissent, and we've been kind of having a conversation around it anyway. But you go through specific kinds of dissent, and it's fascinating to me. The whole premise of the book is fascinating to me, but it's a conversation, I think, that, or I guess there are more statements. I don't know. Your book reads like a conversation. And that's what I like about it. That's how I write myself. I want the reader to feel like they're participatory, in the process. And that's the way I hope the show feels too. I hope this show feels like we're just having a conversation, because we fucking are. And I hope the audience feels like they're involved in it, because you are, whether you want to be or not. So you might as well enjoy it. We are blessed here on the show with the smartest, best, and best looking chat in independent media. And I still have no idea how the fuck that happened. I don't, dude. You go into somebody's live stream and the chat is just fucking brutal. And there's people screaming that the craziest possible shit. And here in our chat, it's people who want to hear and take part in this conversation, and they help each other out and they support each other. And then they send us links after the show, and they're like, hey, about this point that you made, which is great for me because I experience all of these in a relative blackout. I have no idea what the fuck I've said today. None. Yeah. But I'd like to have and I know you got to get out of here.
Oh, that's all right.
In the next half hour or so. But I'm hoping that we can expand on what it is to be a dissenter, and how people who are outside of the military sphere can be I don't know, dude. I'm not even sure what word I'm grasping for here. Stewards is the one that popped into my head immediately. But how people who aren't involved in the military can help anti-war veterans with their dissent, with their message, and how we can sort of, I don't know, remove the distance between anti-war veterans and anti-war, for lack of better word, fucking dirty hippies, Right. How do the freaks unite with the soldiers in order to drive home this message?
I think that it's also one of the other cynical things about getting rid of the draft is that it drove a cultural divide. And so what you end up having is you have soldiers who don't understand civilians and civilians who don't understand soldiers, right? And neither one of them is better or right, and both sides often think they are better, and the soldiers are sure of it, because self-righteousness is in fact the cardinal sin of the soldier. Never make that, make no mistake. And soldiers are snowflakes, by the way. You know, 'cause that's what I was always throwing at people in the streets, right? You know, it's like if you're supporting BLM, like, oh, you're one of those snowflakes, and it's like, have you ever met a bigger snowflake than like a cop? Like, if they don't like insulted, like, are you serious? Like, they're such snowflakes they have to hit their wives about it. You know what I mean? They're so angry about being insulted, which is meant to be flippant, but is statistically accurate. So there is some of that, and I think not enough veterans are willing to step back and do their part and be like, listen, because the book's it tries hard to make this point, which is, yes, I focus a lot on the military dissenters. I was kind of asked to do that when I was pitched the book, but I also do talk about, you know, people outside the military who are in the dissent tradition, particularly on foreign policy and war. One of the things I hope I got across, and I'm always caveating despite hating the C word, which is a different C word than most people have a problem with. But the thing is, I don't think that the military veteran community can or should lead this, right? I don't think that this is, I don't think we should be fetishizing the military or our veterans. I think all of that is dangerous in a republic, right? If the goal here is like a democracy, a republic, some sort of decent society, like turning to the state killers, even if they're reformed, to be like the leadership is problematic. I do think that. However, I live in the world as it is, which is dangerous. But I know that people give soldiers a certain platform and a certain credibility. So then that does mean that there comes a responsibility with that, I think, to speak out and use it until we can hopefully get rid of it, right? Where being a veteran doesn't have that. Because I actually think it would be better if we didn't have any veterans, combat veterans. Like, no one ever talks about that. We celebrate Veterans Day instead of Armistice Day. And the assumption is we'll always have combat veterans because we'll always have war. And I'm like, I want to dream, at least. I want to do the radical act of dreaming about a day when a Veterans Day comes and we're like, do we even need this anymore? Because we're like, we haven't had a war in 100 years and like humans don't live long enough yet. You know what I mean? Where we could have some. So I think that would be a great thing, but it's not on the agenda. So anyway, the book though is kind of like a hybrid of history, philosophy, or philosophical kind of treatise, and then just like policy analysis of the forever wars, you know, and I try to do all of that. I think the thing that I'm calling for, Kirkus Review said it was like a clarion call in deft and mordant prose, and I was like, man, if that's on my like epitaph on my tomb, like I'll be good with that. Like all the worms eat me, like that's pretty good. But the thing is, I'm talking about like bridge building, you know, in general, this idea that okay, everyone has a part to play, right? Everybody has a role to play, so it's the soldiers have to get over themselves and have a little bit of a truth and reconciliation committee inside and publicly and say, I was part of an absurd thing. I was complicit in a number of crimes. I may have even committed some, and I'm not special and I'm not better than anybody. And now I need to just be a part of this society and be part of the solution. Right? Not enough veterans are willing to do that because they really like the public adulation, and they're afraid that if they go too far in like an anti-war direction, they'll lose some of that. And it is an identity. And then I think that the civilian side, and I really don't like the way, I don't like the look of me telling a civilian society how to act, but I would like to see, and I think it is vital for more civilians to say, I need to care about this stuff. I need to care about foreign policy and war and veterans issues because it affects all of us. And like, frankly, if you're like me and you're, you know, and you think that, you know, John Lennon's Imagine was more of like a prescription than a dream, then we are kind of all one in a sense. And so like, let's get to work on that. And it sounds really idealistic, but I think that this is a time for that in a way. And so I'm really calling for a bit of bridge building. So at certain points I say, hey, look, the libertarians need to talk to the progressives to end these wars, but I'm also saying the civilians who would never dream of joining a militarist institution and the veterans of that who saw what's wrong also need to build the bridge, because there's more of us who agree actually vaguely on these points than not. But the government has never cared about that before, public opinion. I mean, right. I like stats, I like history. My last point, during the Spanish Civil War, which is one of my side interests and first loves, 83% of polled Americans supported the Republican side, supported the anti-fascist side. Okay, so how did the U.S. government handle that? Well, we better support them. We better sell them some arms. We better, you know, fight against Franco. Maybe not militarily, but something. No, they held up an embargo on both sides. They diplomatically gave top cover to the fascists, and they sold oil from Texaco that fueled the war machine and destroyed the Republican duly elected government. That's how we did it. So they didn't give a shit about public opinion. But the point is, more people, I think, are generally with us on these wars. They may not be at the systemic level that we would like everyone to be at in terms of their critique, but they're generally with us. So let's build some of those bridges and stop arguing about the nonsense minutia. And I realize how naive that sounds, but I think it's important.
You know, there's room for a little naivete. There is. There's got to be, because that's it. One of the well springs of hope. It really is. And I don't think it should be discounted. Look, we're all so programmed to only dream inside the allowable set of parameters that we've been given by the state, by corporate America, and by the media. And if we dream outside of those parameters, we're immediately othered, we're attacked, we're marginalized, or ignored. And I think on some level, anyone who has thought outside of those parameters has experienced that treatment. And it's a shitty way to be treated. So your natural reaction to it is either to fight it or to suppress those feelings. And it is infinitely easier to suppress those feelings than it is to continue to fight for them. And so we've got to be able to, I don't know, but like allow for those conversations to take place, to make people feel like they're not less or marginalized. Because you're right, I do believe that there are more people that generally agree, especially when it comes to forever wars, than disagree about them. But we're so disconnected, we're so siloed in our own little bubbles. If you look at for example, a pro Julian Assange tweet on Twitter will get immediately suppressed, but you'll see like, okay, it's got 74 likes and 75 shares, which just means that only the person who shared it gets to see it, you know, and they eliminate algorithmically the public at large's ability to view voices of dissent. And I don't know how better way to do it than to just get my fucking happy ass out into the street and scream about it. I don't, you know, and I'm always looking for ways to improve upon what has historically worked in activism, what hurdles get thrown in front of us in the modern era, especially with rampant censorship in the digital space. And so it is purely beneficial. And I hope it's not just for my benefit. I hope it's also for the benefit of the people who watch and enjoy the show, that we have these conversations that maybe are a little bit weird or maybe, you know, drift off into tangent land, because what we're ultimately doing is trying to find a way to become better, more effective activists. I hope.
And they've circumscribed the options. I mean, like you mentioned, I mean, so much has been closed off in the establishment space, and the way they do it is they don't even have to put, you know, they'll do it to Julian, but for the most part, they're not going to put you in jail. They don't have to take legal action against you. There's a self-censorship that goes on in order to maintain kind of a professional success. One of the disciplines that they use in media in order to get rid of dissenting voices is you just don't get invited, right? So the recruitment is itself a discipline. It's itself a way to kind of police the permitted discourse. And so then what that does is it leaves you social media. And then when social media starts getting frozen, what's left? You know, going to the streets is what's left. But what's funny is they'll shut off every other major avenue for you to kind of express your dissent. And then when you get in the streets, they'll say, oh, what are you doing in the streets? Get a job, you know, oh, you're a rioter. It's like, you didn't give us any other options. The democratic system, as you designed it and as you circumscribed it, precluded me from having a voice. So here I am. And like, if some cars get burned occasionally, that doesn't bother me quite as much as a republic being torn down. Like, what's the obscenity? That's the big question. Like, that should be the title of my next podcast. Like, you know, what's really it? Like, it's ridiculous. So and I think that the value of the tangents and the value of the diversions and the connections that we make on shows like this is that you really won't hear it elsewhere. And that's more than platitude. It's a fact. You won't hear it in conversations and these constant like webinar advertisements I get from the New Yorker and the Atlantic that come to my inbox. It's like, I've listened to them. I don't anymore, but for my sins I have in the past. And like, these, you don't get this kind of conversation. It's all like so surface level. We like nibble at the margins. And I don't know, that's not gonna stop the war machine. They laugh while we quibble. They do. They count on it.
None of it is proactive. Even if they do try to give you information that you should know, or information that might not, that's considered like remotely unacceptable by the establishment standards, they might give you like a little crumb of that information, but then they'll say like, oh, no, come back, and they'll wheel you right into that same system of doing nothing, whether via complacency or via fear. And like, you know, the thing about people being mad about a couple cars burning, it's like, fuck off, dude. Sorry. It just really harkens back to like the three evils MLK talked about, where, you know, our republic is falling when extreme militarism, one of the three evils he pointed out, has triumphed in our society, when property is valued over people. And I don't know like how, and I don't know any other way how to make that click for people besides literally going and talking to them in person. So
I'm glad you brought up, the triplets of evil, speech and all that. I've written about it. You can see what I look like. So obviously it makes total sense that I ran the Civil Rights History program at West Point, which I actually did, which is like so illustrative of a department. Like, that is a great department in a million ways, but like, we didn't have a single black officer teaching there. But anyway, I did. They were like, in fact, the way that conversation went was, my boss, great dude, was like, he was like a rare, like pretty progressive dude, colonel. And he was like, initial interview my first day, he was like, you seem vaguely progressive. How would you like to run the civil rights program? I was like, oh, that's it, huh? That's the bar here at the old military. But anyway, I used to teach that, and I would show the transcripts and all that. And I think it's an important point, because I think one of the things I mentioned in the book about who's the enemy, right? Who's the enemy, and who's the block to your progress? Well, okay, we know that like the right wing hates us, but that they're clear about that. But like, I'm worried about some of our like more nefarious, enemies who tell us they're our friends. And the thing I mentioned in the book, and I've written about since, in 1963, around the time of the March on Washington, Martin Luther King's public approval rate was about 50%, right? Which is low. It sounds low to people, because now we've like canonized, sanctified, and sanitized his record, right? We've gotten rid of the radical king, but now everyone loves him, including most Republicans. So we're like, oh, how could he only have had a 50% thing? But that's not the striking number to me. What's striking to me is that 5 years later, right before his death, his public opinion was 75% disapproval. Now, what changed? One would think he'd be more popular because, the Civil Rights Act has passed, right? He's had more success. Some of the overt segregation has gone away. Why is he less popular? Well, it's because it's exactly what you mentioned. He starts attacking materialism and hypercapitalism. He starts attacking militarism. When you say shit like, my country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, you're going to lose some folks. Mm-hmm. You're going to lose some folks who are in the privileged, white, kind of upper middle class elite. And if you look at the polling, that's who he lost. That was the delta. That's the 25%. It was the polite white liberals who were like, they were good with him on the water fountains. They were like, yeah, that's kind of messed up. You should be able to drink from the same water fountain. Like, not in our neighborhood, but you know, like the poor white people and you should share the same water, like total, not our water. Our water is special, but I mean, but they were with him on that. But when he did those other things, he lost those people. And so he dies more unpopular than he was 5-10 years before. To me, I have this dream that if you could just tell people a certain instructive anecdote that's powerful enough, it can shake them. And it's a delusion, right? Because it doesn't usually work. But to me, that's a really important point, because it tells you about dissent and how dissenters are treated. And, you know, he refused to completely reject the rioters, even if he sort of criticized the riots themselves, you know, because he said we have to understand the root of them and all that. People didn't like that. They didn't, because the people who were scared in the suburbs didn't want to hear that. They were like, no, Martin, agree with us. They're horrible animals. Say it like I want you to. And he wouldn't. And yeah, he lost them. And then he criticized Vietnam, and he knew that was gonna really hurt him. He knew it might in fact get him killed.
Well, and he said that a riot was the language of the unheard, and just the month before he was murdered, he said what the world needs now is a radical redistribution of economic power, and that in and of itself was likely enough to order up a bullet. We've been incredibly lucky here to be able to have conversations with a legendary Baltimore activist, Reverend Annie Chambers. And if you're not familiar with Reverend Annie, man, you should be. She is multiple kinds of incredible. She grew up with her oldest brother, James, who was like 20 some years older than her. James was Malcolm X's lieutenant, right-hand man. Like to this day, she still calls Malcolm X Minister Malcolm. Like, and it's ingrained in there. And she's talked about on this show specifically what happened to Martin Luther King Jr. and who is responsible for it. And one of those people is the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Like, without Jesse Jackson working hand in glove with the FBI, it might have been substantially longer before they got to put Martin Luther King down. You know, when the Venezuelan embassy was under siege, not that long ago, like just shy of 2 years ago, the day that Jesse Jackson shows up, within hours, the embassy is raided and everyone is dragged out. Like, and it's just, it's so weird to me that people have lionized Jesse Jackson and put him on the exact same pedestal as Martin Luther King. You know, post sanitization, post whitewashing. That I don't know, dude. The servants of power are always going to be highly rewarded for that until they're no longer necessary, and that's no way to fucking live, Danny. I
said I think certain instructive anecdotes like should be enough to like just like shake people. Like certain instructive acronyms should too. And like if an alien came to this planet and they said, I want to understand like American society and empire, I would just say, oh, just like COINTELPRO. Like that's it. That's it. I'm done. Drop the mic. Because it describes like how another way that dissent is just destroyed from the inside, right? So they attack it from many angles, including subverting it from the inside and playing against the human frailties, because these movements are just people, right? They're just people, and we're the worst, right? We're our best hope, but we're flawed and we can be manipulated, you know, and all this stuff, and a powerful system that makes it a priority. I mean, the U.S. government fights dissent way harder than it fights terror. Yeah, I said that for the first time. Yeah. I think I made that up, but it's a thing. Because what are they more scared of? Really, what are they more scared of? Statistically, dropping a toaster into your bathtub is essentially the risk. This has been shown by like the Cato Institute, not by like some hippies, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the statistical threat of terrorism, even with the one-off of 9/11 included, is extremely low. It's not an actual existential threat to the government, but what is citizen activism. And so, like, where are they going to put their efforts? And I mean, that's not conspiracy theorizing. That's a historian's eye. That's because it's always been thus. Like that didn't require like Cheney's fourth heart to be running his soul. Like we didn't need that. It was already happening. And I think what you're describing with the civil rights movement and the subversion and COINTELPRO, this has been going on. It has ever been thus. And if we recognize it, then at least we know how to take precaution and know what we're fighting. Because if you don't know what the enemy is, if you think the enemy is George Bush, right? If you think the enemy is Donald Trump, like, man, you're going to be spinning your wheels for a while because they want you to think that. Like, and of course they are gross. Like they're nightmares, you know, both of them. But it's bigger.
The weaponization of the term conspiracy theorist has done more to advance illegal wars, bullshit policy, and the complete total pervasiveness of the surveillance state than any other form of brand marketing possible.
It's a conspiracy theory until it's on the front page of the New York Times, and then it's a fact, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and oftentimes it'll be, for example, what's happening right now with COVID, with Operation Warp Speed, with the first of its ever kind mRNA vaccine that went from 2 months ago where it was flat out wrecking more than 80% of everyone who took it in trials to it magically has 94% efficacy. How do we know? Because Pfizer and Moderna told us. Can we look at their studies? No, you can't look at the studies. You just have to take the truth, just have to accept this as fact. You've got Bill Gates saying in an interview, and he's not the only one who says this. We don't know if it's actually going to work. We don't know if it's going to do anything for anyone. It's certainly not going to change mask mandates, lockdowns, or stay-at-home orders, but we have to do it, and we have to get it out to the people. That's Bill Gates saying that, not Steve Poikonen. But if I say that on my show, I'm a conspiracy theorist for quoting Bill Gates. And that's the... Mm-hmm. I'm starting to get frustrated now, so I'm going to mangle my words and trip over them. But it's such a successful psychological operation on the American people that you almost have to respect it while hating it.
Well, yeah, you do. You have to respect the game, right? It's like, like don't hate the player, hate the game. I hate both, actually. But it's impressive. It's a tried and true formula to maintain systemic inequality and empire since 1607 or whatever, right? You know what I mean? Like it works. It works. This divide and conquer, this dissent suppression. If Susan Rice says that the Black Lives Matter protests in the wake of George Floyd have all the hallmarks of a Russian operation, she said that.
Yeah.
She said that. I just let that sink in. She's not a conspiracy theorist, right? That's demonstrably untrue, right? Of course, right? It's demonstrably untrue that like the Russians were behind this, right? But she can still get on CNN anytime she wants, right? She's not a conspiracy theorist. When the New York Times and the Washington Post break Bountygate, and then the 4-star general with the largest intelligence staff in the history of the Middle East admits in a press conference months later, I can't find anything. Like I can't find anything satisfying to prove this. the people who are still talking about Bountygate, including the president-elect, who was then still a candidate, the next day, like even after this broke in like CNBC, like mainstream outlets, they're not conspiracy theorists, but you are, right? It's just it's not about consistency; it's about control, and so it's a different kind of identity politics. Like who you are determines whether what you're saying is an atrocity. What you're saying is a conspiracy theory. Again, it's based on like the partisan lines and the power structures. And I think, I don't know how we fight it exactly, except that I think we can't ever shut up, and we have to build those connections. And so people who might not otherwise speak or consort like have to do that, because it's like a radical act in and of itself, because they'll try to control everything they can, but they can't stop us from making a relationship. You and I, for example, right? And the three of us now, right? And then that's a small thing, except now all your people know me and my people know you. And you just like, it's small, but if like, they can't completely stop that, right? Or, I mean, maybe they'll figure it out, but it's, if we're relying on the day when CNN decides to bring us on TV because we have something important to say, we'll keep waiting. Right? And the empire shall churn on.
That sounds like something a Russian would say, Danny.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's the thing. That's the thing. I haven't got
collaborator.
Dude, we've got.
I can be bought, by the way. I can be bought. Like I'm not that great. I just haven't gotten any checks from Putin yet. I'm not saying he can't buy me off. I'm just saying he hasn't tried. So they got to stop with this asset stuff until my principles are bought off. Then I'll tell you when that happens. I'm a pretty honest guy about my corruption. It just hasn't happened yet. So, oh well. Still waiting, Vlad. Still waiting. My kids are on more vacations.
Well, I'm on the Che Guevara payroll right now, so I'm getting money from the ghost of Hugo Chavez.
Ghost commie cash.
Ghost commies. We have friends that are election integrity activists, and they're getting shit on like Julian Assange activists, because they are questioning not whether Biden stole the election from Trump, but whether we have legitimate elections in general. And like they've flat out been called like Nazi collaborators because they're having people who lean right, who are just there to present data sets, not opinions, but data sets. And it's so fucking cartoonish, man. You mentioned briefly a description of your book that you want on your epitaph, and yesterday you gave me something that I will probably end up on my epitaph, which is a conversation with me is better than most, which was hilariously flattering. I did write a couple of jokes for that. I'm trying to find them. New taglines for Slow News Day based off of that, and now I fucking can't. Okay, there's the thing. Because I'm in the wrong chat.
So understated, they're almost insulting. That's how you deliver a good compliment. Just ask me what I did in my life. Yeah, it goes over great.
I'm getting there though. I feel like I'm finding them. Come on.
Element chat.
Here we go. Yes, here we go. Okay, so Slow News Day. We're adequately but not threateningly above average.
That's good. That's good.
Slow News Day. Oh, you'll fucking remember it.
Slow News Day.
We're like Log from Ren and Stimpy.
I like marginally effective. That's a good way to describe oneself, you know?
Yeah. I'm falling back though. I think I truly love the first one that I can't even fucking find now because I've got way too many things open. Where did it go? Oh yeah, adequately but not threateningly above average. Yeah, Jesus Christ. Man.
No, I mean it's about talking with you. I mean, I mean it. I do a whole lot of different shows. I enjoy them. I pretty much never say no to anything, which is not great for my sleep cycle. But like certain outlets, the conversation is more free, it's more open, it's more in depth, it's willing to go a lot of places because it's grounded in a basic knowledge, you know, and that's fairly rare. So that is a plug for the show in the sense that I can bring something up, and I mean, yeah, we all have encyclopedias in our pockets, so we might not recall everything off the cuff, but you could find it. But it's also just you can go a lot of different places when you have a broad, even if it's not too deep, knowledge of a whole bunch of things. Most people can't do that because they're only one thing. They're like one trick ponies, whatever that is. And so that's a positive for the show. It really is, and not everyone can do it.
Hell yeah. With that, oh, actually, no, I want to pull up one last slide, and then we'll get out of here because we got a hell of a show coming up later this afternoon. Our good friend, and friend of the show, Whitney Webb, got robbed out of her cryptocurrency wallet, and we are going to prove beyond a shadow of doubt who that thief was in just a couple of hours. But you had a quote in your book from General George Patton before he was a general, and this is how Washington D.C. dealt with the bonus army. I would like for you, please, if you could, to just kind of set up who the bonus army was and what they had mobilized for and what they were after.
It's one of those like forgotten but shouldn't be key moments in American history. So, you know, World War I is it's forgotten. It's also kind of been like sanitized, but about 90,000 ish Americans are killed in combat, which compared to the 9 million who died in Europe previous, right, and in the other countries, it seems really small. But actually, because the United States didn't get into the war until so late, and we didn't have like a large army back then, the casualties were incredible. In fact, they were as high as like any American war in terms of daily deaths and stuff. I mean, it was like Civil War level stuff. And the veterans of those wars, just like most of the citizenry, unlike most American wars, left the war very disenfranchised. And in fact, it was probably the most peacenik era in American history was like the 1920s and early 30s in reaction to it. Like, we got bamboozled into this war by the capitalists, you know, by the arms industry. And it was all kind of true to some extent. So they had been promised these bonuses that were going to like matriculate down the road for their service. But then the Great Depression hits, you know, 1929, and it's really bad. And these veterans, just like everybody else, are really struggling. And so they say, we want our bonuses now, like basically a stimulus program for us, because like many of us are frankly almost starving, mass unemployment. And many of us are disabled veterans who can't get employed, right? So there's all these problems. What they do is they actually march on Washington. I mean, they hitchhike there, they jump in the back of like farm trucks, they drive, they get there however they can get there on trains, and tens of thousands of them show up in DC. And this is right around the time that there's a presidential election kind of coming up. And so we're going to have the transition from Hoover to FDR. And they're right there in the Capitol. They've got their families with them. They live in these like tent cities and shacks. It's like a Hooverville. It's a shanty town, but right there in DC. And it's really jarring for the American people. Most of the American people, by the way, support the bonus marchers, right? Public opinion is with them, which makes sense. But of course, the mainstream media and the government brands them as like, you know, they're Bolsheviks and all these things, the same stuff that's used today, right, for the protesters. And the commander of the army at the time, right, the chief of staff of the army is Douglas MacArthur, right? It's a really brutal dude. It's kind of like a West Point alumni party that I'm going to be describing here, but MacArthur gets orders from Hoover eventually to clear the city, right, to move these guys out. But MacArthur, being MacArthur, he goes big. He goes bigger than his instructions, and he gasses and orders his guys to fix bayonets, and you know, like an infant, for example, like asphyxiates and dies in the gas. I mean, and a lot of these veterans are beaten over the head with truncheons. It's really it's a sad moment in American history, right? Now, under his command, his number two, basically his executive officer, his like aide, is Dwight Eisenhower. Okay, so another West Point grad, and he's a little more circumspect about it, but he's the dutiful soldier, and he kind of like He doesn't really like MacArthur, by the way, but he puts into, he does what he has to do. And then in command of a cavalry troop, same job that I did, was a major named George S. Patton, right? So it really is this reunion party, and Patton being Patton, he's like MacArthur. He gets even more aggressive. And then what you're going to show is the instructions that he gave to his soldiers to handle these veterans of the same war he was a veteran of. Okay, so MacArthur and Patton, Eisenhower didn't go overseas. MacArthur and Patton were decorated and brave in World War I in combat. They were the same kind of veterans, and what he's describing is the orders he gave to his active duty troops on how to treat these really struggling bonus marching and correct veterans.
So here's the quote: "If you must fire, do a good job. A few casualties become martyrs, a large number an object lesson," which is just worth unpacking in and of itself. When a mob starts to move, keep it on the run. Use a bayonet to encourage its retreat. If they're running, a few good wounds in the buttocks will encourage them. If they resist, they must be killed. And that's his directive to his soldiers on how to deal with his fellow brothers in arms, because they had assembled to demand that they be paid what they were owed.
I think this really does show, look, the sorts of people that we promote oftentimes in the military, in the corporate world, in government, the sorts of people who rise, they're not always the best among us. They're usually not. I mean, these are often brutal people. These are people who have personality disorders in many cases, that they just love power. There's that whole thing about Kurt Vonnegut. There's one fatal flaw in the American Constitution I don't know what to do about it, which is only crazy people want to be president. Well, there's this aspect of the only person that you'd want to be in charge of many of these things are the people who wouldn't want the power, right? But how do you do that? It's one of these blocks. But I think that's pretty. It's pretty instructive. It shows that almost anyone can be mobilized to crush dissent, even against their brothers and the leaders that we then later lionize. I mean, Trump says Patton was one of his heroes, right? That goes without saying. But so does everybody's uncle. Everyone's uncle at Thanksgiving has a book about Patton on their nightstand. You know what I'm saying? Like that, and like some founding father. Like whichever is like the most racist founding father, like they've got his book too. But like that, this just shows you that these people, no one has ever held him to account for that. Like he should be like, you always hear about cancel culture. Like let's cancel Patton, or like maybe not cancel, but like let's just call that out. And I used to tell my students, I would say, because there's a statute, all three of those guys on the that they have to walk by to get to class at West Point. And I would say to them, when I would do a whole special section of a lesson on the bonus march. It's the only one who did it that I know of in the American History Survey. And I would say, okay, guys, like I'm not telling you not to talk about the excellent tactics that some of these guys may have used at Normandy. And I'm not telling you that you can't think about them in all kinds of other ways. All I'm asking is, when you walk by those statues, in addition to all that other stuff you want to lionize, remember the bonus march. Remember that quote. And I would show it to cadets at West Point. And some people think that's like a jarring and strange thing that I was allowed to get away with it. And it's largely because no one was watching me. And it's partly because it is a real school in many ways. But I just think that is exactly what West Point cadets who are about to graduate need to hear. Exactly what they need to hear. Like there are barracks named after these guys. I lived in MacArthur Barracks for 4 years, okay, while I was a student there. And no one ever mentioned to me in 4 years at West Point, I mean, not once was it ever brought to my attention that MacArthur did that to the bonus marchers, right? Never. No mention of that quote. It's been erased. And so I just wanted to bring it back to life, because I feel like let's know all the truth. Doesn't mean we got to like stop talking about these people. I think we should talk about all of it, but like let's just have all the truth out. And if it proves anything, it's that salvation is not coming from the generals, folks. The New Yorker crowd may have decided that suddenly they love generals because generals don't like Trump, but you are not going to save the republic with the generals, And I just think that soldiers have an obligation to admit that about themselves and reject fetishization, even when it benefits them. Especially when it benefits you.
I think that's an excellent place to wrap. My hope with not only this interview but the show overall is that it helps people get a more complete picture of the truth, that quote and what Patton did, and the fact that you taught it and stressed it. It demonstrates, at least to me, in understanding that we don't get to grow as humans without a more complete vision of history. We're not going to understand anything about ourselves until we're honest with ourselves. So how are we going to understand anything about our country unless we've received honest information about our country?
Yeah, no, I can't agree more, and I appreciate you giving me the space to do it, and that's why it's a better conversation than most. Although I like your tagline better, and I must now live my double life that has always been the case since I was a teenager, and go play flag football with my sons.
Hell yeah!
And,
Yes.
yes, it's time. It's time for that. Yes, the 4-year-old and the 12-year-old makes it interesting. You know, that's a big.
It really does. I've got a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old that almost, it's almost the same age difference. And what the 14-year-old is teaching the 8-year-old gets him lectured every single day. Danny, will you please let people know where they can find you, where they can find your book, where they can find your excellent podcast? I almost wore my Fortress on the Hill shirt today for this episode, but it's still a little bit cold.
Yeah, right.
But snazzy designs.
I can take no credit for any of that. Chris Henry Henriksen, my co-host, former Army sergeant, he is the tech brains and the general brains of the op, and he makes the podcast run. We just got to 100,000 views. It's been our best year. We're super excited about that. It's a start. But fortressonthehill.com is the podcast. We've had great guests recently. Steve's been on the pod. We really have a pretty big range. All of my articles end up at skepticalvet.com eventually. I kind of all accumulates there. And then to keep it simple, @skepticalvet is my Twitter. And I appreciate keeping an eye out. And if you want to pick up the book, Patriotic Dissent, avoid Amazon, pay an extra $1, go to Heyday Books, Berkeley publisher, and buy from them.
That's the link that we put in the description was for Heyday.
It's a non-profit group. They're awesome. Steve Wasserman over there. Check out their books. They're good. They're good people.
Hell yeah, Glory, what you got?
Just that this was a really, really good conversation. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed listening to what you had to say, Danny. And yeah, definitely just what you say about trying to learn the complete truth. Really I think that's going to be a key these days, and just trying to, because you say yourself in your book that we need a collective commitment to education. And then, yeah, I pretty much agree with that wholeheartedly. So yeah, great combo. And yeah.
Well, thanks so much. And it's great meeting you. And I'm glad you're co-hosting and balancing out this lunatic, with some charisma of a different sort. And hey, thanks for having me, guys. Let me run, and let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Danny. And for everyone else still with us, please join us at 3 p.m. Or Josh, are we doing it earlier? I can't. Do we need to do it earlier?
No, I got some sleep.
Okay, so 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have another Slow News Day moderator chat, which has been just so much fucking fun, dude. Those have been awesome. And at the top of the show, we're going to go through a ton of evidence. We're going to discuss and I don't know, set up our own little fucking kangaroo court and convict the scumbag motherfucker who ripped off a single mom of what's really looking to be right now at least $10,000 in cryptocurrency, as well as locking her out of an additional $6,000 that it doesn't look like anyone's going to be able to recover. So because Whitney's a friend and because Whitney's a friend of the show, we're going to mercilessly go through this. Expect a significantly higher amount of swear words than what we had for this particular broadcast. Next week, next Sunday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Gloria, you want to go ahead and pitch this one?
We have Reverend Annie back on. I'm so excited. Okay. Whew. Okay. Next Sunday, we have the legendary, amazing Reverend Annie back on. And one of our topics is going to be what really happened to El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, aka Malcolm X. So that's going to be that. And, I love Reverend Annie so much.
Really looking forward to that. If you are in the Denver or Boulder area, Thursday of next week and Saturday of next week, come hang out with me. The Denver Free Assange group is holding 2 events. The first one, I believe, is a street action Hungarian Park, or at least that's where we're parking before we go walk a little bit. So be there for that. Saturday, 12/12 at 12 noon, Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, Boulder, Colorado. And I would love to see you if you're there for it. I'm glancing at the chat. Yes, Beth, I will use all of Carlin's 7 words you can't say on TV. And there might be some confusion here. Whitney, I don't think can make it for this. It's a little bit too late in the day, and she's already got her kid back. But we're at her request and in her defense are going to lay this out. So hopefully you show up even if Whitney's not here. Or especially since Whitney won't be here. But we will try and get her back on the show very soon for whatever she's got cooking. Thanks again to Danny Sjursen. Again, Patriotic Dissent, Heyday Books. Go get it. It is a really incredible read. We so rarely get a first person viewpoint from war, from a combat veteran who has gone through that and come out the other side an anti-war activist. So I think it's an important book, and I think you should go grab it. Thanks always to Gloria Jones for being the best co-host in independent media. Thanks to Sleepy Josh on the 1s and 2s. Everyone in the chat, we love you. Please turn up again this afternoon for another mod chat that's going to be fucking wild. And until then, guys, good luck to us all.
Beta haters.